All right.
All right.
So today we're going to be reacting to why Germany could not win World War II. This is by Potential History. So I think he's going to be going over some of the ways people think that Germany could have won World War II.
So wait. Why they could never have won?
Yeah, basically.
Yeah, well, you tried to take over the world. Why would you think they'd win? What's this?
Well, I finished fine-tuning my what-if machine. It can answer any what-if question accurate to within 1/10 of a plausibility unit. Who wants the machine to show them an alternate reality?
I want to know.
If Germany wins if Hitler stops making decisions.
If what?
If he stops making decisions.
Who else has a question?
Now that's the Soviet Union
machine?
there with the flag.
Do they win if they mass-produce the mouse tank?
Make that machine show me what would happen
if they took Moscow.
That's so plausible, I can't believe it.
People love rooting for the underdog. These stories strike a chord with us at a very basic level, and you can tell this by how popular these stories are in media. This also translates to real-world stories, although real life does not have a plot that always turns in the underdog's favor. So there's this kind of romanticism connected to fighting for a lost cause that a lot of people assign to a lot of real-world groups. One of these you see talked about a lot is the German army in World War II, that if only dumb Hitler hadn't been in charge, or if different choices were made, that the war would have turned out different. And a lot of these arguments
Only
seem to
dumb
hold
Hitler
water
wasn't
on
in charge,
surface,
as we said.
but upon reflection,
Oh, they just
mostly
happen to be a better
disappointing,
army
not
than
making
everyone
significant
else?
enough change to sway anything.
They're the only
These are my
armies
favorite
of the
how
earth?
Germany could have won scenarios and how they're wrong. I hear this one all the time, that if the Germans had just driven onto Moscow and taken it, the Russians would have capitulated. But it is rarely backed up with evidence as to why. Even in the memoirs of German generals after the war, they constantly mention that the drive to Moscow would have meant victory in the East. And I think the reason for this is that they model the Russian campaign after the French campaign. In the French campaign in 1940, the French surrender once Paris is cut off from its forces and looks like it's about to fall. Using this model, a lot of people think that the exact same would apply to Russia. The only problem with this is Russia is a whole different animal, both politically and geographically. Stalin was going to put every man, woman, and child in the Soviet Union between him and the advancing Germans, and this is exemplified by the way the Red Army fought the war, often trading casualties for time. So if Moscow was taken, sure, it's a political and also logistical defeat, given that the rail network was centered around it, but no way do I think Stalin is just going to shrug and say, well, we tried, after Moscow was taken. And with that, we would probably see the Soviet Union fighting to the bitter end, just like the Germans did in reality. This is also backed up by real-world history from Napoleon's Russian campaign in 1812, where he went on to take Moscow but still lost the war.
Yeah, but they
Russia
would've
is such
died.
a
They
large
would've had
and
even
vast
more deaths.
country that they have the ability
They
to
would've
trade
gave up.
casualties and
No.
land at a higher rate than any other country can. And therefore, the normal rules of war, such as taking the capital and ensuring victory, do not apply.
Are they not seeing this?
Another commonly heard point is that Hitler made terrible decisions and he should have just listened to his generals. Now, I'm not here to defend Adolf Hitler, he's a crazy genocidal maniac, let's not make two ways about it, but this isn't always the case. For example, Hitler and the High Command were all in agreement on invading Russia. They all very much wanted to, in their eyes, destroy communism and save Germany, as Hitler laid out in his book. But once this effort was undertaken, Hitler and his generals began to disagree at times on what moves needed to be made. And once the war is over, many generals in their memoirs begin to claim that Hitler made all the bad decisions, and that if he had just listened to them, the war would have been won. And one example of this,
usually the case with everything,
former point.
most of the time.
Hitler's generals were convinced that taking Moscow would end the war for many erroneous reasons I listed previously. For Hitler, Moscow was a general direction in which to head, but was not the final objective. For him, the resources in the Ukraine and the oil fields beyond were a much more important target. And given Germany's oil shortages, this is a good example of where Hitler was right and his generals were wrong. And actually, a lot of Hitler's so-called mistakes start to make a whole lot more sense once you put it into the context of Germany's fuel shortages. And if you want more information on this, Tick did an excellent video on Germany's oil problem that you should really check out. Another example of this sentiment being wrong is Operation Citadel in 1943. Hitler's generals convinced him that an attack on the Kursk Bulge would cripple the Red Army and renew Germany's initiative in the war. Hitler saw this plan as very flawed, though, famously saying, "Every time I think about Operation Citadel, my stomach turns over." And seeing how poorly this turned out for the Germans, his premonition was eerily correct. Now, if this was the caricature of Hitler always overriding his generals that is commonly seen, Citadel would have been called off before it was launched. Now these are just two quick examples, and yes, there are times, especially later in the war, where Hitler overrules his generals with poor decisions. The Battle of the Bulge comes to mind. But early in the war, when these decisions really count, Hitler is many times making the right decisions when overruling his generals, or going along with them in agreement of a common goal. So Hitler should have just listened to his generals and he would have won the war is a moot point. Because many times he did, and his generals were wrong, and many times he didn't, and he turned out to be right.
He lost, nothing to do with that. That's why he lost.
This is actually a point I used to subscribe to. A very honest critique of the German war economy is that it was not on the right footing. And people make this argument usually saying things like, Germany should have just made more Panzer IVs instead of pouring resources into the Tiger. Or, Germany should have built the Luftwaffe back up so they could regain air superiority. And I will give you that the German war economy in many places
people really think German could have taken over the whole world? Germany?
Tank production in World War II and really highlights how backwards the
Rome.
Process was for armored vehicle manufacturing, and mentions how that knowledge can be applied to other types of war manufacturing. And although once Speer takes over, production is streamlined to a degree, and munitions and weapons production goes up year by year, it's not near where it needs to be to fight this attritional war. So obviously, the solution is to just streamline production, sort of how you see in the American model, and this would have given Germany a better chance in the war. Although this is a good criticism, it misses the core issue. The biggest thing Germany was running low on from 1942 onward is, as I mentioned before, oil. And larger numbers of tanks and planes wouldn't be any good if there was no fuel to run them. Also, Germany was having manpower shortages as early as 1942 or 43, and along with fuel to run these machines, you need people to crew them. These are just two issues that cannot be remedied by streamlining production.
Yeah.
At a certain point, Germany is just going to be out of oil and out of men. And no amount of additional tanks or planes.
You're trying to take over the whole world, dude.
Fighting two fronts.
This is another point that deceptively seems to make a lot of sense. As Germany was crushed by a two-front war, it stands to reason that if Japan and Germany through their alliance had coordinated an attack on Russia, they would have won. And that may honestly be true. A big boost to the defense of Moscow came after Russian troops from Siberia were sent west after the Russo-Japanese Non-Aggression Pact. The only problem with this is that coordination did not and was never going to happen. Germany and Japan were allies by circumstance and shared no real common goals with each other. And in fact, they're operating in opposition to each other at times. German training of Chinese troops in the 30s as they were fighting the Japanese is a direct example of this. In short, neither side was going to stick out its neck for the other. In fact, Russia's common enemy was probably the only instance in which they would have, and even then they did not. The reason for Japan not wanting to do this is mostly colored by the Japanese experience against the Soviets at the Battle of Konkan-Gol, please forgive my pronunciation, where the Red Army gave the Imperial Army a very bloody nose in an undeclared border conflict. This incident convinced the Japanese to not go through with any action that would provoke the Soviet Union, as they did not want war with them, since they were already fighting China and would soon be fighting the United States.
Yeah, they wouldn't have enough.
This avoidance
But Germany decided to go and attack the Soviet Union.
Well, they're right there. That's why. They're not going to go over there and do that.
Any U.S. merchant ships headed to the Soviet Union. So, the Japanese attacking the Soviet Union directly flies in the face of the intentions and characteristics of the Japanese High Command, to the point where it strays out of potential history,
Kill yourself.
into the realm of fantasy.
You have screwed me again.
Japan.
This is my favorite one. If they had just made insert ridiculous design here, the war may have gone differently. And it's the idea that this thing, or this thing, or this thing, would somehow have single-handedly lengthened the war. There are a few fan favorites for pics of these. The one I see most often being the Mouse, the ridiculous 200-ton behemoth that in reality would have been awesome target practice for Allied fighter bombers, and something for Allied soldiers to gawk at once it had run out of fuel and had to be abandoned. Or German jet aircraft, that although cutting edge and superior to what the Allies had, still couldn't have been applied in a large scale due to the aforementioned fuel and personnel problems. And the list for these things goes on and on. A personal pet peeve of mine in this category is the what-if question about the German atomic program, and the claim that if they had applied themselves, the Germans could have come up with an atomic weapon first. This notion, though, just like that of Japan...
That's what doesn't make sense to me. How did we come up with a bomb before them? I think we got it from World War I.
Many of Germany's top scientists were expelled in the 30s for being Jewish, automatically limiting German atomic capabilities. And actually, many of these scientists went on to work at the American nuclear
War
Well,
program.
Einstein too.
So
Wasn't
if this
Einstein?
scenario work, you
No,
automatically
World
have to
War
make
One, I
Nazis
think we took
tolerant
all
of Jews,
their
which is not going to happen.
scientists.
I thought you said
The German
1930.
atomic program is all but
With the
canceled
Jews,
by
and they left.
1942.
I think it
They
was-
might have. I thought it was World War One when they took them, but it could have been
Physicists
World War
themselves
Two.
didn't want to put much into it.
A lot of the
Which worsens to my
scientists.
third point, that Hitler saw atomic science as Jewish science and pointed the focus of German development towards conventional weapons. So we're not even talking about an atomic race between the US and Germany, as it was barely being pursued by the Germans. And to give a what-if scenario about it would fly directly in the face of what Hitler stood for. And this gets into the bigger problem with this question, that even if Germany does produce these wonder weapons and extends the war, it's only going to extend it long enough to be the first country to get nuked, due to the Germany first policy of the Allies.
Are you making a jet plane? Or a remote control that can turn you into super soldier? Or is it just another dumb tank?
Yeah.
Now, these are just a handful of points that people bring up when talking about how Germany could have won, but there are many more that I didn't go into that are equally baseless, such as the Germans should have and could have invaded England, even though the Kriegsmarine would not be able to support a large amphibious attack, and the much larger Royal Navy would have probably sunk the invading force before it even reached the shores.
They only did like an air
Or
invasion.
the
That's it. They
Yeah,
never did a
they
land.
did earlier.
They threatened to do a
Even though
land
it wasn't really
invasion,
the
but
winter
I don't think they
raiding
ever
season
did.
that stopped the
Never
Germans. It was a lack of supplies that needed to be brought up. For more info on that, check out this lecture by David Sahill.
I mean, I think they
You'll
thought
see
everyone
people
was just
bringing
going to give up,
Scenario after
basically.
scenario that bends reality and character
Yeah, I think
motivations
that's
very widely
true.
to craft a scenario that Germany could win. But here's my point. Germany would not have won World War II no matter what way you slice it. The fact of the matter is, this is a country that is too small and too short on resources to take on the three largest world powers at once, especially given the erroneous actions and motivations they have.
Yeah, I mean,
Basically, the Germans dealt themselves a bad hand and played it poorly. And the only way that's going to change is if you bend time and space to their liking with the benefit of 20/20 hindsight. All things that are not going to happen in reality.
It's already done.
They should have just taken over that one little area where they were around Poland and all that, and leave it at that. And they probably could have got away
Well,
with it.
at least with France.
And no one would have
well,
done nothing,
yeah.
Brian. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but that was he tried. I mean, I don't even with France, them taking over France. I mean, that still made it so that Britain got involved. So, I mean, there's no other way to slice it. If he wanted to take over the world, he would have to go against the superpowers. There's no other way around it.
Yeah.
Which inevitably killed.
That's how stupid
Germany.
That's how stupid, ignorant he was. He
Well, he thought he could do it.
He
but
thought he could win like no one else had any kind of weapons. It doesn't even make sense.
maybe underestimated them. I don't
He
understand.
underestimated.
He must
them.
have
Definitely
to think he could go against, at least for that long of a period, to where they would last.
To do it long of a period is just thinking that he could even do it. Like everyone was just gonna, like no one else is like you. Of course, everyone else would love to take over the world, but they're not gonna because they know it's impossible. Probably, you know.
There's too much. It's too much.
You have to be strong from the
opposition against it. So
you have to be strong from the beginning, not be where you are weak and then all of a sudden think you're.
You would have to have a lot like America or Russia, not somebody like Japan or Germany. You needed something huge, the backbone.
But we didn't even focus on doing that, so we didn't even have the weapons till the war started in that, and had all those weapons.
You would have to be a bigger country.
And look how fast we produced them.
Yeah, you would have to be a bigger country like Russia, if anything, to be able to do something like that. So, all right, guys, if you enjoyed the video, make sure you're down, leave a like, subscribe, and let us know what you thought in the comments. We'll see you in the next one.
Peace.
Peace.